I know you love philosophy. How much do you purposefully bring philosophy into teaching people? Because you get people that are only experience the world a certain way. Things are or they aren't. And even just trying to wade into this type of philosophical conversation will lose them pretty quickly. Do you find yourself sort of just trying to edge them away from their rigid view of the world, or explicitly feel like we're going to get philosophical about this?
Sometimes I have a kid who wants to learn philosophy. I get stoked. More commonly, what I try to do is help people think about different perspectives on reality. So a simple one might be like, you think that emotions flow from what happens, but your emotions are a result of how you see a situation. I know a million studies and a million little thought experiments, and I might just try to tell a student that when they need to hear it. Like, oh, this course is making me so angry. No, the course sucks, but you're making yourself really angry about it. I think it's less like, let me explain philosophy. And it's a little more like I use all the things I've learned in philosophy to question people's assumptions and say, oh, well, there's another view. I feel like philosophy and science really connected around this idea, progressive discourse. If nothing is true, how do we know anything? Well, what we do is we try to find people who have different evidence than us, different worldviews, but that we respect. And we say what we see in our evidentiary world, and then we try to make it make sense to them. And then they do the same to us. And then we look to try and find connections where we go, you know what? We don't agree on A or B, but we both think C. And that's the progress of science. So I feel that is a philosophical move as well. And that's the main thing I do with my clients is I say, like, from your perspective, you're seeing this. Your teacher is seeing this. And based on the psychology of anger, this is happening. How do we connect those three dots into one way of thinking about it?
I think a lot of people never consider a plan B in life because they're so busy doing their plan A. And then if something happens to them that flips their world upside down, all of a sudden their reality is different and it makes no sense to them. The experience of being them changes, or they all of a sudden, I injured my eye so badly enough that I went from having two cameras to having one camera, to then coming back to having one camera that only partly worked and they're pointed in different directions. So my version of reality became, I now see two of them. I literally see a clear one and a blurry one, and they're disjointed from each other. How you see things can fundamentally change in a slow, progressive way or in a sudden, jarring way. And that is really challenging for people to comprehend, particularly if they have a more fixed scientific mechanical mindset of the world. And some people are more open to it than others. I went through and learned all these different things about different anatomies and structures. I've taken enough different courses on stuff of how to poke people differently. These last number of years has been more and more learning about the psychology, and it's wading me more into the philosophy stuff to understand human nature more.
I have a drive to be philosophical, like since I was seriously 3 or 4 years old, being like, what is the nature of things? And I'm realizing that shifts in consciousness lead you to ask questions. And when those questions are philosophically sound, they help you grow. But when they're not, why does this always happen to me? Then they can stagnate you so you don't expand your philosophy with your expanding or changing consciousness.
Try to frame challenges for people as an opportunity to learn. People that have had a lot more challenging things happen to them generally tend to end up being more interesting people if they've had more resilience and learned something from it and have come out on the other side. But it can break a person down, and that depends on the support structure they have around them and how willingness they are to break out of a very rigid mindset.
Do you know John Kabat-Zinn? He's a New York Buddhist. He's great. Now he's 80, and he's still so fresh, energetically fresh. It's like, whatever this guy is meditating, get me some of it. But he has this comment, and it's so annoying, and I found it to be so true, that the problems are the curriculum of life. And that learning experience in front of you at every moment is the unfolding of things. And I think it's really hard when things are terrible. And I'm not really here to say when things are super catastrophic, you should feel that. But I do think a lot of the other times that a person is unsettled by the change in consciousness, remembering that this is the curriculum is helpful.
That's what I'm trying to express to my kids that aren't loving going to school right now. I'm like, the details of what you're learning are not as actually your education as much as the fact that you're having to go there and figure out how to relate to all these other people, maybe learn some things, maybe have some struggle, come back. And as my older guy's about to transition to university, I'm starting to have university conversations with him about how first year undergrad is a big weeding out process of some people. A lot of people quit, a lot of people just don't do it. What you learn in that first year from your classes is not the most important piece, but learning how to function in a different system, that's your education there.
And making something out of the material that you find meaningful rather than just doing the tasks. I think that's a really good challenge in university is like, how do I care? How do I find a way to care about this?
You might end up taking a series of courses that you don't care about to
Yeah.
start with,
Yes.
or you thought you did, and you go take them, and you're like, "This
Yeah.
sucks." But then you have an opportunity to hone in on what you do like, and then go down that path.
I think you're getting at something really interesting. There is a big difference between I thought I would like this class, but I hate it, so I have to finish it. And I didn't want to take this class and I hate it. You got to do some shit in life you don't want to do. And
Mhm.
how do you do that? And it's made me think about the people who can do that have consented to the challenge. That's a really different challenge than somebody who's at a school that they find really difficult, that they feel stressed in, but they want to be there, or even just they've chosen to be there. And one way I've differentiated this over the years is the difference between being game to do something and being comfortable actually doing it. So you can be game to go to a school and uncomfortable about it, or you can be not game and not comfortable. And I think those are really different consent situations.
That happens progressively as they get into the early teenage years where they're starting to have a bit more independent thought. They're not just doing things because
Yeah.
their parents put them into it. And before they're just kind of going through a system in kindergarten and grade one and grade two, and they're just like, it is what it is. And then they start realizing, I really don't like this. And then they realize that maybe they do have a say in this, but don't really realize how to express that and don't have great communication with their parents. So it's hard to make choices as a parent for a kid that kind of doesn't want to consent to something but doesn't realize that's an option.
I think the hard thing is that the time frame on developing that ability is like years, not weeks.
Trying to teach a kid that as they grow up, they have to make more decisions about their own future and then live with those decisions
Yes,
and
exactly.
be willing to then pivot and change too if they screw something up.
Yeah, being willing to endure things because you chose them is like, I don't want you to go and be oppressed by people, but I don't want you to be afraid of things that are hard, especially when you chose a hard path. And there's so much benefit in choosing hard paths, I've found that the ability to pay the price for what you want, I think is key.
And you see that even all the way through to adults, though. People, they don't view things that they're doing that have negative impact on their well-being, whether it's their health or their situation. They don't say them as that you chose to eat 2 Big Macs and now you don't feel very well. Kind of people have to realize that some of the things that they are choosing to do are the wrong choices and that it is a choice and you have to.
I had a doctor give me a really interesting flipped perspective on that when I was saying, like, maybe it was McDonald's. I was like, I shouldn't do X, I shouldn't do Y. This was a private doctor. He's since died, but he like kind of saved my life. And he's like, well, Matt, the stress has got to go somewhere. And in that moment, all this like guilt and agitation I felt actually like melted away. And it's not like I felt like, oh, I should eat 100 Big Macs. I just had compassion for my reasons.
Mhm.
And actually, that gave me choices. Interestingly, it made it feel less of a compulsion.
Yeah, if you understand more why you're doing things, there's more motivation to maybe tweak them or change them.
You can tweak them, and then also you can do them without the layers and layers of suffering. where you're like, I'm eating this Big Mac. I shouldn't be eating this Big Mac. Why am I the kind of person who eats a Big Mac? And now you're like layers into something
Yeah.
that's really not going to be constructive. Whereas being like, why am I eating this Big Mac? Oh my God, I'm so fucking stressed. That's why. Suddenly you have an awareness of what you're doing and you might choose another way of making yourself feel better.
One of the sections of my book was called The Problem with Thinking. It's our biggest asset and our biggest liability at the same time. We're so cerebral that we get caught in these destructive loops that ends up creating a lot of the tension and the troubles in ourself versus the simplicity of, or the consciousness of being a cat.
But if we think back to consciousness being fame in the brain, none of your body sensations are getting any fame at that moment. So you actually have a very isolated consciousness, just to probably like the front left Broca's area, or is it Wernicke, some area where it's just like spitting out words. There's this very fascinating studies where they take experienced meditators, so they can see that region in the front left get super active. And there's a region in the back right in the parietal lobe that's more vibes. And they put regular people in an fMRI and they cannot access the parietal because the left front is just talking. And then they put experienced meditators and they can just quiet that region and amplify the back one.
That's cool.
Isn't that cool?
You have your own sort of like producer
Like
keyboard of like
board.
a mixing board of how you access different parts of your brain.
I also wanted to talk about hypermobility though.
Oh yeah, did you read that article that I wrote?
Well, what I understood you to say was that hypermobility is like a sense of being very elastic and loose in the body.
Yeah, it's not necessarily a sense. It is sort of objectively like,
what do you observe? What's a physical thing you see?
I can usually tell within moments of like at very least touching somebody, but even watching how they're sitting and talking to me, like all of your soft tissues in your body are more extensible and stretchy than your average person. So it's
like, what does that look like? Like when you're looking at them, what do you see?
Usually they can't sit still.
Definitely, I feel like that always.
They'll end up like, usually a lot of times people will end up sort of wanting to sit cross-legged in a chair or be sitting kind of totally off sideways or completely slouched down.
And what's happening in their muscular system that's the preference, or in whatever system?
It's not necessarily like a preference. Imagine like a really stiff elastic band versus a really, really stretchy elastic band. Imagine a skeleton and all the bones that are all the different vertebrae, all different joints, and they're kind of held together with a really, really stiff elastic band. It'd be more rigid. You'd have an easier time like kind of stacking it up, and it would have a bit more just structure without having to balance and hold it there, versus having all these pieces held together with really, really stretchy elastic bands. You could stack them up, but they'd probably all fall off pretty easily.
I think what I'm thinking is that the person who's hypermobile, it will take more energy and awareness to make their body do something similar in any moment.
They have a harder time staying still. They have a harder time like standing still or sitting still, because it's a more challenging biomechanical task for all of their muscles to coordinate in a way that actually helps them find and use their bony structure to hold them up. They'll kind of end up hanging off of ligaments. So they kind of look like bowls of jelly a little bit more. If you grab their arm and move them around, you can just feel, it's like pushing, if you push on their rib cage, it's more like piano keys that move up and down versus
than it being working together.
Yeah, just genetically and biomechanically, they're built a little bit differently.
So what can that body do better?
It can usually dance and move around a lot. Like they're born to be ballerinas, and usually they get into performance. You see the contortionists are in Cirque du Soleil, like just not a lot of stretching. They were genetically predisposed to be able to do that.
To be able to have parts that are more elastic and more movable.
It does take actually repetitively doing and using and creating strength in those ranges to be able to do some of the amazing things that those people do. But as a precursor to them doing that, that was a genetic thing to start with.
That's really interesting, because that makes me think of intelligence. It's very similar, where it's a mental flexibility and pattern recognition. But just left to its own devices, it's not actually very good for you. It will lead you down a bunch of weird paths. Mm-hmm. But with structure to give it strength and meaning and knowing how to use it, that fine-grained ability to think is really powerful.
I'm really hypermobile, and like I'm 6'5" and really loose jointed and decided to play rugby a bunch as a
Hmm.
high school student. Shockingly, I dislocated my shoulder because I have this long, lanky, loosey goosey thing, and I tackled somebody, my shoulder pops out. I'm more prone to do that to start with, but you combine that with the fact that I'm genetically loosey goosey, it was easy to sort of suggest that I'm going to get that type of injury. You'll get people that were put into dance or ballet, and the ones that are really quite naturally flexible, usually they find it easier because they have that natural mobility without having to do tons of stretching. Dance type things have a lot of back bracing. It's sort of a chest up, shoulders down, toes out, and you create these particular bracing strategies that really dictate what a big part of what your posture will look like later in life. But then they might decide to go through school and they become an accountant, and they're just genetically not built to actually use their structure to sit still very well. They can, but they have to really learn some biomechanics of posture.
Right.
Um,
To reduce the effort required to stack elastic parts.
you have to learn how to more efficiently use your body to stay still. You've learned how to use it efficiently to move, but we ask people to stay still a lot. And
Yeah, I always find I'm like forcing myself to stay still. Like this chair lets me move. I bought one that's for mobility, but my upstairs one is like there's only one position and I have to.
there's a big cohort of people that are genetically loose jointed. And that is actually a thing where your tissues are different. Then you sit that kid in a class and they ask them to stay still. They're probably getting uncomfortable because they're just having a hard time dealing with gravity. And then a lot of times their brain's having a hard time staying still too. You see people that would fall into the ADHD spectrum. A lot of them also are kind of loose jointed. Their brain wants to keep moving, their body kind of wants to keep moving. Within that breeds anxiety. And then those things usually manifest into lots of different little injuries or aches or pains or tensions. If you're using the range of motion of their joints as a bit of an objective measure, like they'll pass with flying colors because they're very flexible and it's hard to determine physically what's wrong with them because they look like their alignment's good, but they're kind of a bowl of jelly and holding lots of tension because their body's kind of gripping and holding it together. So they can objectively move very flexibly, but actually feel stiffer than your average person because their muscles are all tense trying to hold everything together. Does that make sense?
Wow, that's blowing my mind actually. So to accommodate the hypermobility of the joints and ligaments, the muscles become more rigid.
Your body's this big muscular tug of war of all these different muscles pulling in different directions. To stack everything up and move really efficiently is a skill. You got to learn how to do it well. But we either don't learn that skill or we learn a very specific skill like dance, or we did tons of one specific thing, or we always had a parent that was like, stand up, shoulders back.
So we compensate instead of learning the actual efficiency. And then because we compensate, we're overusing the other part in the opposite direction.
We'll tend to just simplify it and broadly brace areas as it's simpler. It's like less cognitive load. And when you're young, you can kind of tolerate that. Your body doesn't necessarily complain with aches and pains as much. As you get older, that catches up to you and things start hurting a lot more. And you take those people and put them through the medical system that has a tendency to take x-rays and MRIs and look inside you. You don't actually see it from because there's no tumors there, there's nothing torn. It's a movement based thing. It's not a structure based thing. So no doctors can tell you what's wrong with you. That feeds into your anxiety, which then makes you tense more, which then makes you more uncomfortable. So again, that's a big group of people that I end up seeing in physio.
I think we talked in a prior session about like how is ADHD adaptive? It doesn't make sense for it to be just like a disability that evolved. And when you see such a cluster of traits, it's like, okay, evolution selected this
Hmm.
somewhere. And you're telling me you have like flexible people with a ton of movement energy and worry a lot who are capable of fine grained movements. Like those are going to be good warriors.
Hmm.
They're going to be good sentries. There's so many roles, and we need roles like that and a positive view of what it is to be hypermobile and ADHD. Thinking of that as, like having a Ferrari. It's a hard car to drive, but if you drive it right, it goes really fast.
Totally. And that's where we need to learn at a younger age to screen those people a bit, to be like, maybe you shouldn't play rugby, maybe you shouldn't be an
Yeah.
accountant, maybe you're born
Yeah.
to be an actor or an actress or in performance or an athlete. Like, easier said than done.
Well, in a way, but in a way, you're right that it's not rocket science. Like, not all of them even need a special program or, I mean, movement training would be great, but part of it would just be flagging. Sitting still all day may not be the path for you.
I played a lot of contact sports and I was pretty good at them, but I always just felt like I was hit by a truck afterward. I got injured a lot. And then I went through kin school, went through physio school. It wasn't until probably first or second year of physio school that I realized that being loose jointed is a thing. And when I started in physio class, you have these clinical skills labs where you're stripping down half naked and poking and prodding at each other, just getting
Yeah.
used to feeling other people. A lot of people don't
Ah,
actually touch other people.
I've never been like, so where's your liver at?
Yeah, so you have no frame of reference for what you experience. It might be different from what other people's experience, both physically and mentally. And again, that's the sense of being you. That's where consciousness meets physicality.
Right.
Yeah.
And if consciousness is fame in the brain, it's like, how can we get information from the body into my famous parts of my brain so that I can work with them? Even just the idea, oh, you're hypermobile.
Mm-hmm.
It will be hard to sit for a long time. Now creates a different conscious experience of agitation sitting in a seat. How can we make people conscious, ourselves too, of the things that are affecting us that we can't quite feel or tell? Some of it is talking to people who have concepts for us, and some of it is better interoception. And really, it's like when those two hit, you're like interocepting better, and you can have different logic about what you're feeling. That's a powerful scenario.
I just put out a course that's called Making Life Your Workout, a practical guide to posture, which is more designed for these people like myself. I did it together with an equally loose jointed Pilates instructor, trying to just do movement based things and to create the building blocks of the skill of movement to try to, because you get all these people that really want to work out and exercise, but they just keep hurting themselves and don't realize why. If you go on my whythingshurt.com site, I just put it up last week.
You've been listening to Why Things Hurt and How We Learn with your hosts Brent Stevenson and Matt Giammarino. Why Things Hurt and How We Learn is brought to you by our sponsors Envision Physiotherapy, Work with Matt, whythingshurt.com, and Remix Your Education. Subscribe to the podcast at Apple Music, Spotify, or on your favorite podcast app. Why Things Hurt and How It's How We Learn.